3 long days passed inside the cold metal walls of the council ship. Lee Hyun had not slept properly since his capture, because the aliens kept coming to his cell at different times. They used bright lights and loud noises to keep him confused and tired. This was an old trick that worked on most prisoners, but Lee Hyun had been trained to handle much worse things than sleep deprivation. The cell was small and white, with no windows and no decorations. Just a bed that was too big for a human body and a toilet that was designed for alien anatomy. The walls were smooth metal that reflected the harsh artificial light, making everything look cold and sterile. Lee Hyun sat on the floor instead of the bed and began to meditate the way his trainers had taught him years ago. Dr. Zeffin was the chief scientist on the ship, and she was responsible for getting information from prisoners. She belonged to a species that looked like giant mantises with long, thin arms and big compound eyes that could see in many different colors. She had broken hundreds of prisoners from dozens of different species over her long career in council intelligence. She studied the readings from her instruments with growing frustration. This human was unlike anything she had encountered before. His brain patterns were completely different from any known species. His body chemistry processed drugs and chemicals in ways that made no sense according to her medical knowledge. "The human is very unusual," she told Commander Vexstar as they stood outside the interrogation room. "We have tried neural probes that can read thoughts directly from the brain. We have used chemical injections that make most creatures tell the truth without being able to stop themselves. We have even tried sensory deprivation chambers that drive prisoners insane within hours. The neural probes were her most advanced technology. They could penetrate the electrical fields of any brain and interpret the patterns of thought. Most species had similar brain structures that processed information in predictable ways. But when she tried to read the human's mind, she got only static and interference, like trying to tune into a radio station that was being jammed. And what happened? Vexstar demanded his patience wearing thin. His yellow eyes flashed with anger and his clawed hands scratched marks in the metal walls. "Nothing," the scientist replied with frustration in her clicking voice. "The human's brain patterns are completely different from anything we have seen before. When we try to read his thoughts, we get only confusion and noise. When we inject the truth chemicals, his body processes them so quickly that they have no effect. And the sensory deprivation just makes him sit quietly like he is meditating or praying. This should have been impossible." The council had been developing these interrogation techniques for over 5,000 years. They had tested them on every known species in the galaxy, from the silicon-based rock people to the energy beings who lived in gas clouds. Every creature had biological and psychological weaknesses that could be exploited to extract information. "This is impossible," Vexstar roared, striking the wall with one of his clawed hands and leaving deep gouges in the metal. "No species in the galaxy can resist council interrogation techniques. We have been perfecting these methods longer than most civilizations have existed. How can one primitive human defeat our best science?" Dr. Zeffin adjusted her equipment nervously. She had never seen the commander so angry or so confused. "Perhaps we should try physical pain, sir. Many primitive species respond to simple torture even when advanced methods fail. Their nervous systems might be too simple for our sophisticated techniques to work properly." Physical torture was considered crude and outdated by council standards. Most species could be broken much more efficiently, using mental and chemical methods. But humans seemed to have some kind of natural resistance to the advanced techniques that worked on everyone else. Maybe their primitive brains could only understand primitive methods. "Do it," Vexstar ordered. "But remember that the council requires living specimens. If you kill him, you will answer to the High Command personally. They want to study human biology and psychology to understand how this species has spread so rapidly across the galaxy." Inside the interrogation room, Lee Hyun sat strapped to a chair that was designed to hold creatures much larger than humans. The restraints were loose on his smaller frame, but they were still strong enough to keep him from moving. The room was completely white, and the lights were so bright that they hurt his eyes even when he closed them. When the aliens came in with their pain devices, Lee Hyun closed his eyes and began to recite names in his mind. These were the names of people who had died long ago on a planet far away. People who had suffered much worse things than anything these aliens could do to him. Their memory gave him strength and reminded him why his mission was so important. The names came from the darkest chapters of human history, times when his species had turned against itself with a cruelty that made alien torture seem gentle by comparison. He thought about the children who had died in camps, the families separated forever, the entire communities wiped out by hatred and fear. These people had faced death with courage and dignity. They had not broken even when facing the ultimate horror. The aliens tried electricity first, sending painful shocks through his body that made his muscles spasm and his teeth clench. The current burned through his nervous system like fire. But Lee Hyun had been conditioned to handle electrical torture during his military training. He knew how to breathe through the pain, how to keep his mind separate from his body. They tried sonic waves next, using sound frequencies that felt like hammers pounding inside his skull. The vibrations shook his bones and made his vision blur, but Lee Hyun had learned meditation techniques that allowed him to retreat deep inside his consciousness, where the pain could not follow him completely. They tried heat and cold and pressure and chemicals that burned his skin and made his lungs feel like they were on fire. But Lee Hyun had been trained by people who understood that the mind was stronger than the body when properly prepared. He had spent years learning to endure things that would drive most people insane. Between sessions, they would ask him questions about human military strength, about colony locations, about weapon technology, about defense plans, about hidden bases. Lee Hyun would look at them with his dark eyes and say nothing at all. Sometimes he would smile, which seemed to make the aliens even more frustrated and angry. "We are not your enemies," Dr. Zeffin would say in her artificial voice that came from electronic translators. "We simply want to understand your species. If you cooperate, we can make your life much more comfortable. We can give you better food, better quarters, medical treatment for your injuries." Lee Hyun never replied to these offers. He knew that these creatures saw humans as nothing more than animals to be studied and controlled. They had destroyed his ship and killed his friends and colleagues. They talked about understanding and cooperation, but they brought only death and slavery. On the third day, something different happened. During one of the torture sessions, the restraints on Lee Hyun's right arm came loose. The guards rushed to fix them, but not before his sleeve had been pulled up further than before. Now more of the black markings on his arm were visible under the bright lights of the interrogation room. Dr. Zeffin stopped what she was doing and stared at the exposed skin. She had seen tattoos before. Many species decorated their bodies with pictures and symbols for religious or cultural reasons, but something about these markings looked different. They were not random pictures or simple designs. They looked like they meant something important, something significant. The markings were incredibly detailed and precise. Every line was perfect, and every symbol was clearly defined. They covered a large area of the human's arm, and they seemed to follow some kind of organized pattern like writing or mathematical formulas. Under the scanner's light, Dr. Zeffin could see that they were not just decorative artwork. Guard, hold his arm still. She ordered, adjusting her scanner to get a better look at the strange tattoos. The big alien warship called Eternal Justice moved slowly through the broken pieces of metal and glass floating in space. These pieces used to be a human ship called New Soul, but now it was destroyed and scattered everywhere like toys thrown by an angry child. The alien ship was huge, much bigger than any human ship, and it had strange blue lights running along its dark metal sides. Commander Vextar stood on the bridge of his ship looking out at the wreckage. His skin was green and scaly, like a lizard, and he had forearms that moved independently. He was tall, maybe 8 feet, and his yellow eyes could see things that human eyes could not see. He felt happy about what he had done. The humans had broken the galactic law by building colonies where they were not supposed to build them. Now they were paying the price for their disobedience. The human colony ship had been carrying 5,000 people to a new world beyond the outer rim territories the Galactic Council had forbidden expansion into that region because it was supposed to be neutral space. But humans never listened to rules they did not like. They thought they could do whatever they wanted just because they bred fast and spread across planets like some kind of virus. Lieutenant Kicksnell came up to him walking on her 6 legs. Her body looked like a giant spider, but she wore a uniform that showed she was an officer in the Galactic Council military. She had been scanning the wreckage looking for anything useful or dangerous. Her multiple eyes could process information much faster than most species, which made her valuable for intelligence work. "Sir, we found something interesting," she said in her clicking voice that sounded like breaking glass. "We have one, human who is still alive. He is hurt very badly, but he is breathing and his heart is still beating. The medical scanners show he was floating in space for almost 6 hours, which should have killed him." Vextar turned all 4 of his arms toward her. This was good news. A living human would be very useful for getting information. The Council needed to know how these weak creatures had managed to spread across so many star systems so quickly. Humans lived such short lives compared to other species, and their bodies were so fragile that it seemed impossible for them to be successful in space. Most species in the galaxy lived for hundreds or thousands of years. They had time to plan carefully, to build slowly, to think about consequences. But humans lived for maybe 70 or 80 years at most. They rushed into everything like children playing with dangerous toys. They made mistakes constantly, but somehow they kept surviving and spreading. Where is this human? Now Vextar asked his mandibles, clicking with anticipation. "He is in our medical bay, sir. The doctors are keeping him alive, but just barely. He was wearing some kind of military uniform, so he might be a soldier rather than a civilian. The doctors say his body shows signs of extensive combat training and old injuries that healed badly." This was even better news. Military humans would know about defense plans, about hidden bases, about weapon technology. The Council had been trying to understand human military capabilities for years, but humans were very secretive about their defenses. They never shared information willingly, and they had a reputation for fighting to the death rather than surrendering. "Bring him to me when he can walk," Vextar ordered. "I want to see what makes these creatures so stubborn and so successful. Maybe we can learn something useful before we turn him over to the science division." The human was brought to the bridge 2 days later. He walked slowly because of his injuries, but he held his head up high like he was proud instead of defeated. His uniform was torn and bloody, but he still wore it like armor. His name tag said Li Hyun in both human writing and the galactic language that all species used to communicate with each other. Li Hyun was not very tall compared to the aliens around him. Most humans were small by galactic standards, but something about the way he stood made him seem bigger than he was. His black hair was messy and dried blood covered parts of his face, but his dark eyes burned with anger and determination. He looked at each alien on the bridge like he was memorizing their faces for some future reckoning. Vextar studied the human carefully, trying to understand what made this species so different from others. Most prisoners begged for mercy or tried to bargain for their lives. But this human just stood there waiting, like he had expected this moment and prepared for it. His breathing was controlled and steady, despite the pain he must be feeling. "You are the survivor," Vextar said through his translator device that changed his words into human language. "You will tell us everything about your species' plans to take over more planets. You will give us the locations of your hidden bases and the specifications of your weapons." Li Hyun looked directly at the alien commander without showing any fear or submission. "I will tell you nothing," he said in a clear, strong voice that carried across the bridge. "You destroyed my ship and killed my people. You can do whatever you want to me, but I will never help you hurt more humans." The other aliens on the bridge stirred nervously. Most species showed respect or at least caution when facing Council authority. But this human spoke like he was the one in charge, like Vextar was the prisoner instead of him. There was something in his voice that suggested he had faced worse things than alien interrogation, and survived them. Vextar laughed, and the sound was like metal scraping against stone. This human was exactly what he had expected. Humans were famous throughout the galaxy for being stubborn and refusing to give up even when they had no chance of winning. They would fight impossible battles, sacrifice themselves for lost causes, and never admit defeat even when surrounded and outgunned. But everyone breaks eventually when the right pressure is applied. The Council had developed interrogation techniques over thousands of years that could crack the mind of any species they had. Neural probes that could read thoughts directly, chemical injections that made lying impossible, and sensory deprivation chambers that drove prisoners insane within hours. "Take him to the interrogation rooms," Vextar ordered. "Make sure he stays alive, but make him understand that cooperation would be much more comfortable than resistance. We have ways of getting information that are much more pleasant than the alternatives." The guards grabbed Li Hyun and started to drag him away, but he shook them off and walked by himself. His torn sleeve flapped as he moved, and for just a second some black marks on his arm were visible. The aliens thought it was just decoration, like many species put on their bodies for cultural or religious reasons. They had no idea that those marks would change everything they thought they knew about humans. As Li Hyun was taken away, Vextar felt confident that he would have all the information he needed within a few days. Humans might be stubborn, but they were still just animals with no special powers or advanced mental training. They had no defense against scientific interrogation methods that had been perfected over millennia of warfare and conquest. The commander walked to his private quarters, feeling pleased with himself. He would get the information, extract everything useful from the human prisoner, and then turn him over to the science division for experimentation. The council would reward him for his success, and maybe even give him a promotion to a larger ship with better assignments. But Vextar did not know that he had just made the biggest mistake of his very long life. The human he had captured was not just any soldier. Li Hyun carried secrets that would shake the foundations of the Galactic Council and change the way every species in the galaxy thought about humanity and their place in the cosmic order. The marks on his arm were not simple decorations or religious symbols. They were a map, a history book, and a warning, all written in ink on human skin. They told a story that went back thousands of years and reached across the entire galaxy, touching every species and every world in ways that no one could imagine. Dr. Zephyr had not slept for 2 days. Her compound eyes were red and tired, but she could not stop working. The human prisoner's tattoos had become the most important mystery she had ever encountered. Every symbol, every number, every tiny mark seemed to contain information that should have been impossible for any human to know about galactic history. She had connected her personal computer to the Council's main historical database, something that was usually forbidden without special permission from the High Command, but Commander Vextar had given her unlimited access when she told him that the markings might contain intelligence about human military operations and secret bases. The database contained records going back over 50,000 years, covering the history of hundreds of different species and thousands of worlds. Much of this information was classified at the highest levels, because it contained details about wars, genocides, and other events that the Council preferred to keep secret from the general population of the galaxy. The Council believed that most species were better off not knowing about the darker chapters of galactic history. Knowledge of ancient atrocities might cause panic or rebellion or demands for justice that could destabilize the current government. So they kept the worst events locked away in classified files that only the highest-ranking officials could access. As Dr. Zephyr compared the tattoo symbols to the historical records, she began to notice matches, numbers that corresponded to galactic coordinates, dates that matched significant events, symbols that appeared in classified military reports. The more matches she found, the more frightened she became of what this might mean. The first match was a series of numbers that corresponded to the exact coordinates of the Cathani home world. The Cathani had been a peaceful species of aquatic beings who had been completely wiped out 3,000 years ago. The official records said they had died from a natural plague, but the classified files told a different story. Commander Vextar, she called over the communication system, her voice shaking with excitement and fear. "You need to come to my laboratory immediately. What I have found changes everything we thought we knew about humans and their place in galactic history." "What have you found?" Vextar demanded as he entered the lab. His 4 arms were crossed over his chest, and his yellow eyes were bright with anticipation. He had been expecting some kind of military intelligence or technical specifications, not historical research. Dr. Zephyr activated her main display screen, showing a detailed image of Li Hyun's tattoo alongside data from the Council archives. The comparison was shocking and undeniable. "Sir, these markings are not decorative body art. They are a comprehensive historical record containing dates and coordinates that match events from our most classified files." She highlighted specific sections, of the tattoo showing how the symbols corresponded to galactic coordinates and historical dates. But the most disturbing part is that these events happened thousands of years before humans achieved spaceflight. How could they know about things that happened before they left their home planet? That is impossible, Vextar said. But his voice was less certain than before. He could see the evidence on the screen, but his mind struggled to accept what it meant. This would require a level of knowledge and record-keeping that should have been beyond human capabilities. Dr. Zeffin highlighted more sections of the tattoo. These coordinates correspond to the location where the Cathani species was completely wiped out 3,000 years ago. The Council. Records say it was due to a plague, but look at this symbol next to the coordinates. She showed him a small mark that looked like a human face surrounded by stars. According to our xenological database, this is an ancient human symbol representing protection or guardianship. But how could humans have a symbol for protecting the Cathani when they had never met them? Vextar felt his stomach turn cold. The Cathani genocide was one of the Council's most closely guarded secrets. Only the highest ranking officials knew that it had not been a natural plague, but a deliberate extermination carried out by the militaristic Draknor Empire. The Draknor had wanted the Cathani waterworlds for their own expansion, and they had used biological weapons to kill every living thing on those planets. Show me more. He ordered, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Zeffin moved to another section of the tattoo. Here we have coordinates for the Valen system where 17 billion members of the aquatic collective died in what the records call a reactor malfunction. But look at the date tattooed on the human's arm. It matches exactly with the classified reports. The Velen disaster had been another cover-up. The reactors had not malfunctioned accidentally. They had been sabotaged by corporate interests who wanted to claim the mineral rights to the Valen worlds. The deaths of 17 billion innocent beings had been dismissed as an industrial accident to avoid political complications. She continued, pointing out match after match, the Proxima 7 extinction, where an entire planet had been sterilized by orbital bombardment, the crystalline massacre, where living crystal beings had been harvested for their valuable minerals, the Great Purge of the Outer Rim, where dozens of species had been eliminated to make room for Council expansion projects. Every major atrocity in galactic history was represented on Li Hyun's skin, along with symbols that suggested human knowledge or involvement. But this was impossible. Humans had been a primitive species confined to their home planet when most of these events occurred. But this is the most disturbing part, Dr. Zeffin said, highlighting a series of more recent dates and coordinates. These locations correspond to conflicts that were resolved peacefully according to our official records. The Taurian border dispute, the Centauri trade wars, the Silicon Valley rebellion. These were all considered diplomatic successes for the Council. What are you saying, Vextar? Asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer, and it terrified him. I am saying that these were not diplomatic successes, sir. I cross-referenced the dates with reports of unusual activities, ships appearing and disappearing without explanation, technical failures affecting aggressive military forces, natural disasters striking at very convenient times. The pattern is unmistakable throughout galactic history. Zeffin took a deep breath before continuing. Someone has been intervening in galactic conflicts for thousands of years. Someone with advanced technology and detailed knowledge of Council operations. Someone who has been preventing genocides and stopping wars while making it look like natural events or diplomatic solutions. You think it was humans? Vextar asked. But he already knew the answer. Not just humans, sir. I think it was this human specifically, or at least the organization he represents. Look at these personal symbols mixed in with the historical data. They appear to be individual identification markers. Each symbol represents a different operation, a different intervention, a different life saved. The implications were staggering. If humans had been operating covertly in Council space for millennia, if they had been preventing the very atrocities that the Council had covered up and forgotten, then everything the galactic government claimed about peace and civilization was built on lies and the blood of unknown human heroes. The emergency session of the Galactic High Council was called within hours of Commander Vextar's urgent report. Representatives from 17 different species gathered in the Great Chamber aboard the massive capital ship called Cosmic Harmony. The ship was so large that it had its own weather systems and small cities inside its hull, and it served as the mobile headquarters for galactic government. Supreme Chancellor Morden was the oldest member of the council, and he had seen more galactic history than any other living being. He belonged to the crystalline species, and his body was made of living crystal that rang like bells when he moved. His species could live for tens of thousands of years, which made him a repository of ancient knowledge and forgotten secrets. The chamber was enormous and filled with the sounds of different species communicating in their native languages. Some spoke in clicks and whistles. Others used electronic sounds or chemical scents that filled the air with strange smells. The universal translators worked overtime to convert everything into a language that all species could understand. The architecture was designed to accommodate every type of life form that belonged to the council. There were sections filled with water for aquatic species, chambers filled with different atmospheric mixtures for beings who breathed exotic gases, and gravitational fields adjusted for species from high gravity or low gravity. World's order. Morden chimed his crystal body, producing a sound that echoed through the chamber like church bells. We are here to discuss the discovery made aboard the Eternal Justice concerning the human prisoner. The implications of this discovery are so serious that we have called this emergency session to determine our response. Dr. Zeffin stood at the center of the chamber, feeling very small, surrounded by so many powerful beings. Her display screens showed detailed images of Li Hun's tattoos, alongside data from the council archives. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable, but she knew that many of the representatives would not want to believe what it meant. Some of these representatives had been involved in the covered-up atrocities, and they would not want their crimes exposed to the general galactic population. Other representatives had built their entire careers on the myth of council peacekeeping, and they would not want to admit that their accomplishments were illusions. Honored council members, she began, her voice shaking slightly. The human prisoner's body contains a complete historical record of galactic atrocities going back 3,000 years. But more importantly, it contains evidence that humans have been actively preventing genocides throughout our space for millennia, without our knowledge or permission. Councillor Thessera of the Serpentine Coalition raised her scaled head high above the other representatives. This is impossible. She hissed through her forked tongue that tasted the air for chemical signs of deception. Humans only achieved interstellar travel 200 years ago. They are a young species with primitive technology and simple social structures. Dr. Zeffin highlighted specific sections of the tattoo showing the incredible detail and precision of the markings. These coordinates match the locations of 17 separate genocidal events that occurred over the past 3,000 years. The dates match exactly with our classified historical records. But, in each case, there is evidence of human intervention. What kind of evidence? Demanded Councillor Jakarim of the Mechanical Collective. His electronic voice processed the question through multiple probability matrices, ships appearing at crucial moments. With no record of their origin or destination, Dr. Zeffin replied, technical failures that crippled aggressive military forces just before they could complete genocidal campaigns. Natural disasters that struck oppressive regimes with suspicious timing and perfect precision. The pattern is consistent across thousands of years and dozens of star systems. She showed image after image of documented interventions that had been filed away and forgotten. Each incident had seemed like a coincidence at the time, but when viewed together, they revealed a coordinated campaign of covert operations spanning millennia. The chamber erupted in arguments and accusations. Representatives shouted denials and demands for more evidence. Some species had been involved in the covered-up atrocities and did not want their crimes exposed to the galactic public. Others were shocked to learn about events that had been hidden from them by their own government. Silence, Morden commanded, and his crystal voice cut through the noise like a sword. We must examine this evidence carefully. The implications are too serious to dismiss with emotional reactions. We are dealing with the possibility that our entire understanding of galactic history is wrong. He had Dr. Zeffin present each piece of evidence in detail. The Cathani genocide, where an entire species had been wiped out by biological weapons, but mysterious ship movements had evacuated survivors who were supposed to have died. The Valen massacre, where reactor sabotage had killed 17 billion beings, but technical failures in the attacking corporation's equipment had prevented even worse destruction. Case after case revealed the same pattern. Atrocities that the Council had either ignored or actively covered up, followed by interventions that had saved millions of lives. Operations so sophisticated and subtle that they had left almost no trace in official records. The humans had been conducting a secret war against genocide for 3,000 years. But how is this possible? Asked Councillor Renzak of the floating cities. His gas-filled body shimmered with agitation and fear. We have the most advanced intelligence services in the galaxy. We have spy networks that monitor every major species. How could an entire civilization operate in our space without our knowledge? Because you did not want to know, Morden said quietly, and the chamber fell into complete silence. His ancient crystal eyes reflected the light of 1,000 suns, and his voice carried the weight of millennia. The Council has always preferred comfortable lies to difficult truths. We classify the failures, seal away the embarrassing facts, and pretend the galaxy is more civilized than it actually is. Dr. Zephin activated her final display showing the current scope of human operations according to the analysis of the prisoners' tattoos. They have active cells in over 300 star systems. They have been monitoring potential genocide situations and intervening when necessary. The refugee ships that we thought were simple colony vessels were actually evacuation operations. The technical failures that ended several recent conflicts were actually sabotage missions carried out by human agents. Weight of revelation settled on the Council like a crushing physical force. Everything they believed about human expansion, about galactic peace, about their own effectiveness as leaders was based on lies and ignorance. Humans had not been spreading randomly across the galaxy seeking new worlds to colonize. They had been systematically positioning themselves to prevent the very atrocities that the Council had failed to stop. Commander Vextar returned to Li Hyun's cell with a completely different attitude than before. The arrogance and contempt were gone, replaced by something that might have been respect or even fear. The alien commander studied the human prisoner, carefully noticing details he had missed before during his initial interrogation. The way Li Hyun carried himself, despite his injuries, showed years of military discipline and combat experience. The calluses on his hands spoke of constant weapons, training, and manual labor. The scars that marked his body told stories of battles fought in darkness against enemies who left no witnesses. The muscle definition suggested enhancement beyond normal human capabilities. Your tattoo. Vextar began slowly, choosing his words carefully. We have analyzed every symbol, every date, every coordinate in our most advanced laboratories, using our best scientists and historians. Li Hyun looked up from where he sat on the floor in a meditation position. His dark eyes met the alien commander's, gaze without flinching or showing any sign of fear or surprise. Then you know, he said simply, as if this moment had been inevitable. I know that your species has been operating covertly in our galaxy for thousands of years. Vextar continued, his voice barely above a whisper. I know that conflicts we thought were resolved through diplomacy were actually ended by human intervention. I know that lives we thought were saved by luck or natural disasters were actually saved by human sacrifice and blood. Li Hyun nodded slowly. Yes, that is correct. What I do not know is why, Vextar said, leaning forward. Why would humans spend their own lives to save alien species that they had never met? Why would they operate in secret without asking for recognition or reward? Why would they turn their entire civilization into a covert military operation, dedicated to preventing atrocities committed by others? For the first time since his capture, Li Hyun smiled, and it was a sad expression filled with pain and memory. Because we learned early in our history what happens when good people do nothing, he said softly. When civilized people turn away from suffering, when governments choose politics over lives, when everyone decides that someone else will handle the problem. He stood up slowly, his muscles stiff from days of confinement and inadequate food. Tell me, Commander, what do you know about human history? What do your databases contain about our species before we reached the stars and joined the galactic community? Baxter accessed his personal datapad and read the official information. Humans evolved on a planet called Earth in the outer spiral arm. They developed nuclear weapons before achieving space flight, which is unusual but not unique. They fought numerous wars among themselves over resources, territory, and ideology. They were considered a violent and primitive species when they first made contact with galactic civilization. Li Hyun rolled up his sleeve, completely revealing the full extent of his tattoo. The black markings covered his entire arm from wrist to shoulder, thousands of tiny symbols, dates, and coordinates arranged in perfect detail. Every mark had been placed with surgical precision, and every line had deep personal meaning. This is not just a record of galactic atrocities, Li Hyun said, pointing to specific sections of the tattoo. This is also a record of human atrocities, the ones we committed against ourselves before we learned better, before we understood what we were capable of becoming. Vextar looked closer at the tattoo and saw that some of the symbols were different from the galactic coordinates. These showed locations on Earth, dates from human history, events that had happened long before humans reached space, numbers that represented something so terrible that even alien eyes could sense the weight of tragedy. These numbers here represent 6 million people murdered in organized camps, Li Hyun said, pointing to a series of marks near his wrist. His voice was steady but filled with pain. These represent millions more killed in forced famines engineered by their own governments. These represent entire populations destroyed by systematic genocide carried out by their own species. The alien commander's skin turned a darker shade of green as he realized what he was looking at. This was not just a military record or a tactical database. This was a memorial to the worst crimes in human history, worn permanently on the skin of a soldier who had dedicated his life to preventing them from happening again, anywhere in the galaxy. We did this to ourselves. Li Hyun continued, his voice growing stronger. We learned what intelligent beings were capable of doing to other intelligent beings when they had power and opportunity. We learned that civilization was just a thin layer covering the darkness that lived in every sentient mind. We learned that good intentions and noble speeches meant nothing when faced with hatred and fear. But you stopped these things on your own world, Vextar said desperately. Humans developed laws and institutions to prevent genocide. You created international organizations to protect human rights, Li. Hyun shook his head sadly. Laws and institutions failed us repeatedly. We tried international courts, but they only prosecuted the losers. We tried global governments, but they became corrupt. We tried economic sanctions, but they only hurt innocent people. The only thing that worked consistently was people who were willing to act when everyone else was willing to look away. He touched a series of symbols that represented successful interventions, both on Earth and across the galaxy. People who remembered the victims, people who said never again and meant it with their lives. People who were willing to die to keep that promise even when no one would ever know their names or honor their sacrifice. When we reached the stars and learned about galactic civilization, we thought we had found something better, Li Hyun continued. But we discovered that the same patterns existed on a larger scale. Species destroying other species for resources or territory, or simple hatred, atrocities being classified and forgotten, politics being more important than lives, committees debating while people died. So you decided to act yourselves without permission or recognition. We decided that someone had to, Li Hyun said with finality. The council maintained peace by maintaining ignorance. You classified the failures, sealed away the uncomfortable truths, and pretended the galaxy was more civilized than it actually is. But the victims were still dead, and new victims were still dying while you debated protocols and jurisdiction. The Great Chamber of the Galactic High Council had never witnessed a debate as intense and divisive as this one. Representatives from 17 different species argued with a passion that threatened to tear apart the government they had built over thousands of years of careful diplomacy and compromise. Some demanded immediate military action against the human shadow warriors. Others called for a complete investigation into the council's own failures and cover-ups. Supreme Chancellor Morden watched the chaos with ancient eyes that had seen civilizations rise and fall across the galaxy. His crystalline body rang softly as he moved, producing sounds like distant bells that somehow managed to cut through the shouting and bring temporary order to the chamber filled with angry alien voices. "We have deliberated for 3 days," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of millennia and the authority of the highest office in galactic government. "The evidence presented by Dr. Zeffin is overwhelming and undeniable. Humanity has been conducting unauthorized military operations throughout Council space for 3,000 years. The chamber fell silent as the implications of this statement settled on every representative present. They were not just discussing a violation of galactic law. They were confronting the possibility that their entire system of government was built on a foundation of lies, and that an allegedly primitive species had been more effective at preventing atrocities than the most advanced civilization in galactic history. Councillor Renzak of the floating cities pulsed with nervous energy, his gaseous body shifting colors as his emotions fluctuated. "These operations violated our sovereignty," he declared, his voice synthesized through translation equipment. "They had no legal right to act without council approval, regardless of their motivations or the outcomes of their actions." Councillor Thessera hissed in response, her serpentine body coiling with anger. "They acted while we debated endlessly in committees. They saved lives while we filed reports and held hearings. They succeeded in preventing genocides while we failed to even acknowledge that genocides were happening under our watch." The chamber erupted again as old grievances and hidden shames came to the surface. Species that had committed atrocities did not want their crimes exposed to the general galactic population. Species that had been victims of covered-up genocides demanded the justice that had been denied for centuries. Species that had served faithfully on the council realized that their entire careers had been built on comfortable lies. Representatives shouted accusations across the chamber. Some claimed that humanity had manipulated galactic events for their own benefit. Others argued that human intervention had prevented wars that would have consumed entire star systems. The debate became so heated that security forces had to be called in to prevent physical violence. Morden raised one crystal arm and the chamber fell silent again. "We are not here to debate the past," he said firmly, his voice echoing off the walls. "We are here to decide the future. The question before us is simple and unavoidable. What do we do now that we know the truth about human operations?" Dr. Zeffin activated her display screens one final time, showing the current scope of human operations across the galaxy. "According to our analysis throughout the galaxy, at this very moment, human agents are monitoring potential genocide situations in 47 different star systems. They have ships, crews, weapons, and intelligence networks that appear to surpass our own capabilities in both size and effectiveness." Councillor Jakarim of the Mechanical Collective processed this information through his electronic consciousness. His synthesized voice was calm, but the implications of his words were shocking. "They are currently tracking ethnic tensions in the Rigel sector, monitoring resource conflicts that could lead to planetary wars in the Outer Rim territories, and positioning evacuation ships near the Centauri trade routes, where corporate interests are threatening indigenous populations. How do they know about these developing situations before our own intelligence services do?" demanded Councillor Vex of the Hive Mind, his collective consciousness struggling to understand how individual humans could outperform their networked intelligence gathering. "Because they are actively looking for genocide patterns," Dr. Zeffin replied, "while we wait for situations to become diplomatic crises requiring our intervention. They identify potential atrocities in their early stages and position themselves to prevent them from occurring." The implications were staggering and humbling. The Council had built a vast bureaucracy designed to respond to crises after they had already caused immense suffering. Humanity had built a covert military organization designed to prevent crises from developing into tragedies. One system was reactive, political, and often ineffective. The other was proactive, practical, and apparently successful. Morden looked around the chamber at representatives who were struggling to understand their own irrelevance. "For 3,000 years you believed that galactic peace was maintained through diplomacy and law," he said quietly, his crystal voice cutting through the tension. "But the truth is that peace was maintained by humans who were willing To die in shadows to protect strangers they would never meet. But this cannot continue. Counselor Renzak protested, his gaseous form flickering with anxiety. We cannot have an unauthorized military force operating independently in our space. It sets a dangerous precedent that could lead to chaos and the breakdown of galactic order. Why not? Asked Counselor Thyssara, her scaled head turning to face him directly. They have been doing it successfully for 3 millennia. They have prevented 17 confirmed genocides and countless smaller atrocities according to the evidence. They have saved more lives than all of our diplomatic efforts combined over the same time period. Because it makes us irrelevant, Renzak replied with brutal honesty that shocked the chamber into silence. If humans can maintain galactic peace through covert action more effectively than we can through official channels, then what purpose does the Council serve? What justification do we have for our authority? The chamber fell completely silent as everyone contemplated this devastating question. The Galactic Council existed primarily to prevent exactly the kind of large-scale atrocities that humans had been preventing. The fact that humans had succeeded, where the Council had failed repeatedly, meant that the entire galactic government might be nothing more than an elaborate bureaucratic theater. Morden activated his personal communication device, connecting him directly to the Eternal Justice where Li Hyun waited in his cell for whatever judgment the Council would render. Bring the human prisoner here immediately, he commanded. It is time we heard directly from humanity about their operations and their intentions. The journey from the Eternal Justice to the Cosmic Harmony took 6 hours, during which time the Council chamber remained in session, with representatives arguing among themselves about what questions to ask the human and what demands to make. Some wanted to arrest all known human operatives. Others suggested offering humanity an official role in Council peacekeeping operations. When Li Hyun finally arrived in the Great Chamber, he was still wearing his torn military uniform, but his tattooed arm was now fully visible to every representative present. He showed no signs of fear or intimidation despite being surrounded by some of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Instead, he looked at each counselor with eyes that had seen too much suffering to be impressed by political authority. The human was escorted to the center of the chamber where a special platform had been prepared for him. The platform was designed to accommodate his smaller stature while allowing all the representatives to see and hear him clearly. Translation devices ensured that his words would be understood by every species present. Human Morden began, his crystal voice resonating through the chamber. You stand before the highest authority in galactic civilization. You are accused of participating in thousands of unauthorized military operations, violations of our sovereignty, and interference with the internal affairs of sovereign systems. How do you answer these charges? Li Hyun looked around the chamber, slowly taking in the faces of creatures who had spent centuries congratulating themselves on maintaining peace while he and thousands of other humans had died in secret to make that peace real. His voice when he spoke was clear and strong. I answer that we did what needed to be done, he said without any trace of apology or regret. We acted when you would not. We saved lives that you were willing to sacrifice for political convenience. We kept promises to the innocent that you were unwilling to make. The chamber stirred with angry murmurs, but Morden continued. What gives humanity the right to act as guardians of galactic peace without the consent of the legally constituted government? Li Hyun touched his tattoo gently, the memorial and historical record that covered his arm. The same thing that gave us the right to stop our own genocides on Earth, he replied. The fact that someone has to act when atrocities are being committed. The fact that moral authority comes from moral action, not from legal documents or political appointments. He stepped forward and his voice carried to every corner of the vast chamber. You ask about rights as if rights matter to the dead. You speak of sovereignty as if political boundaries matter to children being murdered. You talk about legal authority as if laws have ever stopped a single genocide in galactic history. Counselor Renzak pulsed with indignation. We are the elected representatives of our